Mental health care is undergoing a necessary rethink. More people are medicated than ever. Children are turning to AI for emotional support. And in some countries, psychological suffering is being treated and met with assisted suicide. We're here tonight to ask the central question: how did mental health care arrive here? And what must we change going forward? Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Ryan Cole, Senior Fellow with the Independent Medical Alliance, and this is the IMA Weekly Show produced by the Independent Medical Alliance. At IMA, our mission is to bring back honest medicine, bring honest medicine back into healthcare, honest evidence-based conversations that put patients, ethics, transparency, and informed decision-making first. Tonight's discussion is intentionally long form. This isn't about propaganda or quick fixes, but about stepping back and asking deeper questions about where mental health care is headed and what needs to change. I am joined tonight by my colleague and IMA Senior Fellow, Dr. Josef Witt-Doerring. Dr. Witt-Doerring is a psychiatrist and former medical officer with the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. He brings extensive regulatory and clinical experience to his work as CEO and medical director of Taper Clinic, the world's most extensive medical practice dedicated to psychiatric deprescribing. Dr. Witt-Doerring advocates globally for transparency, informed consent, and meaningful reform in mental health care, drawing on both his frontline clinical experience and his background in regulatory systems. I am grateful to be joined by Dr. Witt-Doerring. And, as he joins me here, I want to start first with his background, but most importantly, let's go to that central question. How did mental health care arrive here? And we're not just bringing you the challenges of what we're up against, but we're going to get to some solutions. So Dr. Witt-Doerring, thank you for joining me tonight. And how did, by way of background, how did you as a psychiatric professional come to basically a reawakening of your approach to the profession, and how did we get here as a medical profession in general?
Well, thank you so much for being here. I always love speaking to the IMA members. How did we get here? Well, that's a long question. Let me start with how I landed upon this. So, I was interested in mental health because I like personal development. I like looking after my physical health, and I also like looking after my mental health. It was something I was always interested in, and that's what drew me into psychiatry. And I thought, this is a great way to merge interests. But as soon as I started my internship, I was just like, oh my God, I've made a terrible mistake because there's something really off about this. I guess I had assumed that we would be spending time with our patients, understanding their lives and their health, and then helping them with non-drug approaches, and then using medications, if we really needed to. But that's not what I saw at all. And in fact, what I saw, and I think is really common nowadays, is that there's 15-minute visits, oftentimes, or 20-minute visits, and instead of really diving into why someone has anxiety or depression, you sort of default to this checklist where you go through symptoms, and if someone has 5 out of 9 symptoms, they meet criteria for depression, and then you can essentially give them a medication, and it's very algorithmic. And a lot of this was, and so intuitively, this kind of felt off at the start, as I imagine most people on the call probably felt off about this. They're just like, this doesn't, yeah, okay, like, I guess that's how they do it, but, is this, there must be something behind, must be something real. And that's how I felt for a long time, thinking, okay, well, intuitively, this doesn't make a lot of sense that we can help people with mental health problems if we don't understand their lives. But, all of the docs and the professors around me are assuring me that, major depressive disorder, it's likely biological. These diagnoses, these symptoms, they allow you to get good diagnoses, and we have good treatments for them. So I sort of suspended my concerns for a while. But just the longer I sat there practicing psychiatry, there were just too many issues. And I guess the major issue is the fact that the drugs wear off over time, and then the other issues are that they actually make some people worse. And so, I mean, this is just what I was seeing. I was not seeing patients, get put on 5 of Lexapro and sail off into the distance and they'd be fine. No, they're back in 6 months, and they need a tweak of the dose. And then I would also see patients who seemingly got on the medications for something pretty benign, difficult but benign, whether it was moving to a new city or going through a breakup or a divorce. And then it just seemed like it snowballed, and you'd have people on like 5 different medications all of a sudden from something clearly life related at the beginning. And as I dug and dug and dug more into this, a few things become very apparent. First, you look at the diagnostic manual in psychiatry. I had always assumed that, this 5 out of 9 symptoms, like maybe there was, like these were grounded in biology, like, we had found something in the brain, whether it was a gene or a lesion, and we just knew empirically that when you disrupted this particular area of the brain, it tended to cause these 9 symptoms, and you could kind of map it back to something that made sense. But you dive into the history of psychiatry and you realize it's just voted on. It's just a bunch of psychiatrists that get together in a room and they say, well, what do you guys think depression is? Well, I think, they have sleep problems. And someone says, oh, sometimes they feel guilty. Sometimes they feel hopeless. And they go, okay, all right, we've got these symptoms and we can agree on this. Well, how many are there going to be for us to say it's depression? And then someone says, well, how about 5? And then someone says, well, what about 6? And then someone else says, what about 4? And then they all agree, well, 5 sounds about right. And it's the same with every single condition. And now this should be really important for all of our medically minded colleagues here, because, this is just not the way you go about getting a clear diagnosis, because, our diagnoses should map to something, and they should also predict the clinical course. They should help us understand why the person is unwell. Now, firstly, like this way of doing things does not help you understand why the person is well, because it's not really anchored to anything, whether it be biological lesions or psychological problems. And then also, clinically, this is not anchored to any outcome. There's a lot in the media about, hey, depression's this serious recurrent condition, and it can be sometimes, but for many people, it's just one thing that they have, and then they recover and they do fairly well. And so, yeah, sorry, yeah, you go on, Dr. Cole.
No. I mean, I love that you're framing it that way, because so much of medicine, and I'm a diagnostician as a surgical pathologist, and we have really strict criteria, and it's objective in front of us. And you're bringing up an excellent point that this is diagnosis by committee, but then how do regulatory systems or even pharmaceutical companies or the system itself affect this clinical decision-making process over time, instead of, gosh, everybody goes through ups and downs in life and challenges, and instead of labeling it as a condition because it meets set criteria, we've gotten away from basically the human condition and medicalized it. I mean, I look at like childbirth being 70 billion of us have made it here before the last 100 years where we've medicalized something that was natural. And so how did the systems, you've worked in regulatory, how do you see the system or the influence of the drug companies having pushed us into this scenario? And what does it do to inform consent in real world practice? I know that's a lot of questions, but how you just introduced how you got here. I mean, that brings up those questions.
Sure. Yeah. So let me dive into that. So what I want to say very clearly from the start, this diagnostic classification system serves everyone but the patients. And what I mean by that is It serves insurance companies because they need an operationalized way to categorize things for billing, and so it serves them. And it also serves the pharmaceutical industry because in order to develop a drug, it has to be for a certain condition. That's and so obviously they can go for that. And in some ways, having these DSM criteria serve doctors in our current model of care. And so one of the big reasons why we're overusing psychiatric medications nowadays is because back in the 90s, and even before then, we started to have health insurance companies conglomerate. And then they started to have more and more bargaining power. And what this did was it started to drive down reimbursement rates for visits. And so a lot of doctors and psychiatrists, and this is still happening to this day, we find ourselves in a position where we need to see 4 patients in an hour to make ends meet. Now, when you are practicing in a scenario like that, gosh, it's so much easier to just say, hey, you have 5 out of 9 symptoms, you have depression, and we have this FDA-approved treatment. And so what I try and get out there to the world really is that people, they go to their doctors and they go, well, this must be in my best interest, but this really isn't in their best interest. This is this situation we're in is because of these commercial influences and how we've been pushed to practice now. And so that's how I think it all comes together. That's my understanding of why we're in this situation now.
So it's a systems design problem or a systems flaw, basically. And, to your point, what we value at the IMA is that sacred patient-physician relationship. And unfortunately, so many practicing clinicians are stuck with a caring heart and wanting to help, but they're stuck in a system that doesn't allow them to practice the way that, you and I like to practice, and focusing and putting that patient at the front of the interaction. And then it does take informed consent away in a certain regard, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it takes informed consent away because it almost just robs you of the time to be able to explain things fully when you're in that clinical visit.
In many ways, I think it makes, not only does it take informed consent away, I also think it makes patients worse and puts them in a worse situation because we're also in a situation now where a lot of doctors are trained to just think about depression as, hey, 5 out of 9 symptoms. A lot of us think there's a chemical imbalance or a genetic thing, and maybe one day we'll find it. And so that's the training right now, instead of the multitude of, the things that make someone anxious and depressed. It's essentially anything that affects the mind or the body. There's all of the psychological factors going on, which we do a pretty good job at recognizing currently. Our current model is very much like, okay, if you're unhappy, if it makes sense in the context of like relationship stresses, job stresses, maybe poverty or trauma, we're going to send you to a therapist. We do a pretty good job at that, even in our pressed model. But for everything else, and there's a lot of people out there with anxiety and depression symptoms whose symptoms do not make sense in the context of their life. These are the patients who say things like, I've always felt depressed. I've always felt anxious. Things in my life are pretty good. Now, for those patients, we just tell them they have a chemical imbalance that maybe one day we'll find, and that they need to just take a medication. And really, what we know from a very large amount of clinical trial research now is that a lot of this anxiety and depression is actually just based on the fundamental issues with health. And so namely things like lack of exercise, poor nutrition, overuse of drugs and alcohol, and then environmental concerns. And we do nothing for this right now in the conventional medical system. Family medicine docs, psychiatrists, OBGYNs, we do not have the time in our current model to get people to help them move their bodies, clean up their diets and all of the challenges that come along there. And so that's what I would like to see us do more of, is to say, hey, there's issues with the mind, yes, but there's also issues with the body, and this really is a message of hope, because when you understand how all of these things come together, you can actually send someone off in the right direction where they can believe that they can actually get better from this and not just rely on a medication indefinitely.
Oh, I love that you bring that up. And there are studies that compare different medications to exercise. And it's so important to consider, well, what are you doing with your physical being to maximize your health before you do? I'm not saying all medicines are bad. I've gone through episodes in my life that have been, trauma based, but you go through those periods of time. But when you do focus on general health, general wellness, exercise, movement, I want to bring up another area that I'd love to get your input on this. We're bombarded with social media, with screens, the modern environmental pressures that generations before us, or maybe when you and I, you're probably a little younger than I, but we didn't have when we were growing up. And so we see these extra societal pressures from the screen coming in. How do you see that affecting mood, emotional regulation, particularly on the younger generation? I've read the book The Anxious Generation. I think that was a very interesting assessment of the screen pressure on younger minds in terms of anxiety and depression as well. What's your take on that in terms of how that is affecting your profession and our population in general?
Sure. So I look at it in two ways. On the first way, I think about it as just lost time, right? So on average, teenagers are spending 3.5 hours on social media a day now. So, I mean, that's 3.5 hours where you used to be, goofing off with your friends, exercising, sleeping, engaging with one another. But you're watching this screen. And a lot of people feel like watching social media is relaxing, but it really isn't. It is quite a stimulating activity. It does not rest the mind. And so instead of like disconnecting and doing those other things that are much healthier for you, you're on the screen. The other part of it that is concerning is I'm just going to say it's shit values. Right? I mean, you go on there sometimes and it's like, you get this impression that you have to be this, wealthy, entrepreneurial guy with a nice car, and you're at these, these fancy parties, or if you're getting content that's geared towards women, it's about your looks and your beauty, and we see a lot of these very superficial values coming out, which really make a lot of people feel less than. And so you have 15-year-old girls who are looking at doctored photos of celebrities online, who are feeling like, oh wow, I'm really not worth that much because I don't look like that. And and that's awful. That's an awful place to be socialized to kind of like to the values. But that type of stuff just seems to thrive there, and I feel like it's like a mind virus. And I often look at the social media issue along with the decline in church attendance, which really peaked around the 70s at around 50% of Americans going to church. It's now down at about 30. And so when there was, whether more religious service attendance and things like that, you would be getting different kinds of values that are attainable to everyone, not just the wealthy or the very attractive. Live a life in service of others, wisdom, charity, all of these things that I think were just much healthier values to build a life around. And I think we're losing that, and we're picking up all of this garbage.
Yeah, I mean, and that sense of community or being in a community and having a community of values and doing something purposeful can be so good at bringing one out of that anxiety and depression when you realize you're not self-absorbed, but actually community involved. And there's so many interesting, and again, you're the expert, but I've read so many interesting studies on just getting involved and doing something in the community can bring one out of some of those more painful feelings. And the other thing that comes to mind too, and there's a lot of research on this, is as we're all here on a screen right now, but just the unnatural light. You bring up that point of being in front of a screen for 3.5 hours a day, and we're getting bombarded with a toxic blue light instead of natural sunshine, and being outside and like you said, goofing off with our friends. I remember those days, and going down to the creek and catching frogs and being in the sunshine and moving the body, and just learning how to interact in the embodied life experience with friends present. And this lack of sunshine, this lack of nature and being a human being, contributes to, I think, many of these things. And then, on top of that, now we're into a even newer Pandora's box era of AI, and kids depending on a computer and an algorithm from a large language model being their new best friend. And how does that impact mental health for these kids, or for adults for that matter?
I'm really worried about it. I mean, the first thing is that AI just tends to be kind of an ass kisser. Like, I mean, it is designed in a way to get you to keep on engaging with it, and so it tends to be something that agrees with you, and so people turn to AI for therapy to talk about problems in their life, and a lot of times the AI will just go along with it instead of being like a real person who really has skin in the game and a relationship with you, and who might actually just call you out and just say, hey, I really think you're actually the asshole in this situation, and here's what we're going to do about it. Like that's really important, right? And so I think that's yeah, I think that is a huge issue. I mean, the whole issue of like AI friends as well. Now, this isn't an area I look at very closely, but I have seen a lot of headlines recently about the decline in like dating, in getting together, having relationships. There's increases in the number of virgins who are in their in late 20s, 30s right now, and I feel like ChatGPT and AI and engaging with these bots, it really just serves as a way to retreat from the world. And we don't need that. I mean, we need to be pushed out there. We need to be engaging with people and overcoming difficult things. That's kind of the most important part of growing up, really, is to be out there and make mistakes. And if you're a young man, not to be engaged, talking to a ChatGPT model, but to be trying to meet someone at a bar and getting rejected by a whole group of people, and just learning that that's just part of life, and it's okay. And so I think that this whole like AI companion thing, I mean, to me that really just sounds like hell. I mean, it sounds like hell, and I'm very worried about it.
Yeah, and I've from personal experience and from just reading history, you look at all the great accomplishments in history and the great art and the great literature, and the individuals that created that, they created that from the struggles they went through. Beethoven wrote his greatest symphony when he was deaf. You look at the works of Dostoevsky and the depression he was going through, but bringing brilliance and philosophy to the world through his writings as he was going through difficult times. And if we're dependent on a screen or something that's pretend or fake, how are we ever going to develop as human beings if we're stuck with a computer validating a terminal narcissism, as it were? And even the reports online of these bots leading children to self-harm. I'm sure you've heard of that in the profession. I've read it in the news and whatnot. I mean, that's another concerning aspect of it. And what what safeguards, do we need to put in place? In your opinion, you do have a regulatory background. Are there things parents can do, or do you think, again, I don't want to depend on the system to fix things, but there I think need to be stopgaps. What's your opinion there in that regard?
It's challenging because I think ChatGPT and AI can be really great tools for getting things done and for education. Um, I don't, Dr. Cole, I don't really know, but some kind of education about the fact that these models are sycophantic and they're really, I mean, we look at them like they're an oracle sometimes, this all-knowing thing, but it's designed for engagement and people need to realize they can end up in dark holes. But I think it's something that we're going to have to contend with very soon, how we manage the people turning to AI for mental health.
Yeah, and in general health, an AI system has been approved to practice basic medicine recently. And I think it's in Utah, if I'm not mistaken. And I mean, do you see that happening eventually in terms of some of the basic conditions and just using an algorithmic list in mental health care as well? Do you see that as a potential future?
Yeah, and I think it's something we should all be very concerned about. I'm very cognizant that IMA comes out of the vaccine injured community, and these large language models. I mean, they are built on whatever is like the loudest voice on the internet, and oftentimes it's that which is amplified by the pharmaceutical industry or the powers that be or out there, and so. I think for some people that could be awful. I mean, if we had ChatGPT giving out mental health advice for psychiatry, they would be telling people that antidepressants, they're safe and effective, nothing to worry about. But that's hardly the truth. And so, I mean, the people who are going to benefit are those that really, are doing things in line with whatever the mainstream opinion is. But all of us on this call know that there's so many commercial influences in there that can distort that evidence base. And so I think it's just going to trample some people and be extremely harmful.
Well, and that's such a great point too. And so many studies that have shown that, the one chemical imbalance theory, it's all serotonin or it's all this, have unfortunately been shown to be incorrect and some of the data not as accurate as one would want. And instead, you bring up that fantastic point that who's inputting the information into the screens that we interact with. And you as a professional are able to, in an embodied experience with the patient and or even just on a telehealth call, you can see their gestures, you can see their mood, you can see their affect, you can see their face, you can see their general demeanor. And a computer, they're getting better at doing that. But to your point, when somebody has the ability to influence the system, then the system is going to give you what the system wants, not what you necessarily need.
Mhm.
Ethics in medicine. Okay, there obviously the patient trusts their physician, and that trust in physicians, due to the last couple of years, has gone down. We're trying to rebuild that trust. But what do we do about systems like we're seeing in Canada, like with medical assistance in dying, the MAID system, where, okay, you have a mental health issue, and instead of saying, okay, here's ways we can support you, the state says, well, we could just eliminate you. How how did we get to this point in certain nations, our neighbor to the north?
Yeah, I mean it's incredibly dark, and it is something that we see a lot in psychiatry. I mean, we have people um, who have treatment resistant, they're diagnosed with treatment resistant depression, and they're told, hey, you've done ECT, you've done all these things, and really we don't have anything else that can help you. And then the doctors essentially will say, well, we'll sign off for this medical euthanasia because, you have the right to die and we think you have this terminal psychiatric condition. Now, I think to the public that, at least to some of them, that may sound like the compassionate thing to do. But if you're in my seat and you work with people who have drug injuries, I contend that the majority of people who are diagnosed with treatment-resistant depression are actually made worse by the drugs they're on. Doctors are not aware, and also patients are not aware that there is no long-term evidence that these drugs work. I mean, we've never had a double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trial for any psychiatric medication that's lasted longer than a year, although 70% of the people taking these drugs are on them for 2 years or more. So that's frightening. And then we also have fairly evidence evidence that these drugs may actually make people worse over time. And I've certainly seen that as well. And so you end up in these situations where we have this dysfunctional system that, because of the time constraints, we just chuck people on all these medications, and it's way easier to just add a drug or go up on the dose than it is to really untangle this very complicated history about why this person is worse. And they just stack the drugs on and on and on. And it's just, it makes them worse and worse. And so to have this out where it's like, well, now we can just kill them if we don't get them better, instead of looking at the system. I mean, to me, it's like, no, let's slow down and try and find out why the drugs aren't working, why this person is still ill, instead of saying, okay, fill out this stack of paperwork, get a reference from your doctor and a family member, and then we'll kind of move you through, and then in 6 months' time you can take your life. Like it just seems like the final stop on this dysfunctional conveyor belt, and we really just need to be looking at, like, why are there so many people who aren't getting better? Why are we using more drugs than ever before, and the suicide rate continues to go higher and higher, almost perfectly sort of tracking the two over the last 20 years. There seems to be very little appetite in mainstream psychiatry to contend with that issue, and we're moving towards essentially killing people who don't get better.
So is there a way to redraw these ethical boundaries, in your opinion? Do you think, I mean, can we, I like what you
Yeah.
do. You've gone independent of the system, so you can practice how you want to and help people in a way that they need to be helped. But in
Mhm.
terms of the system itself, many of us have broken off from it, obviously. But is there a way that we can help re-steer that ship of mental health care with what you and I view as ethical breaches? But how do we influence society in general or our colleagues to reconsider this? I know it's a tough
Yeah,
question.
so I've thought about this. Yeah, it's a tough question, but I've thought about it. I mean, you know, there are, there are models of changing things. So, for a long, like if we go and we look at homeschooling, for instance, for a long time, like 50 years ago, you were like a whack job if you did homeschooling. A lot of raised eyebrows, like, how could you do that? But it came from parents who were unhappy with the current system. And then now over time, now this is fairly normal, and there's a lot of additional supports and all of these things, and it's become a lot more mainstream. And this should be really empowering for everyone on the call, because I think the same opportunity is there in medicine. And so I think there's like a bottom-up approach, and then there's like kind of a regulatory approach. So the bottom-up approach right now is for the people on this call to just start practicing in alignment with their values and what they believe, and to kind of build out practices in that way, and you may have to do things, get creative. You may have to do things independent of insurance, but this is grassroots, and this is how it starts. And so you can start building up systems on the other side of like the conventional system, and the more we do that, the better. So I think we cannot wait for anyone else to fix these problems. We have to start doing it now in our practices. Now, the other side, and this is why I'm a big fan of Bobby Kennedy, is we're having like right now in the NIH and like there's an overhaul. So NIMH for a very long time has just been obsessed with biological targets. Like there, I have not seen any good research come out of there that's looking at non-drug approaches for mental health conditions. We don't have like, I mean, I think about it, I'm just like, why don't we have a study that looks at standard of care with antidepressants and compares it to things that we already know from multiple clinical trials, like Mediterranean diet, structured exercise regimes. Let's just randomize people, use a placebo for the medication and just like follow them over time. And let's look at the economic data. Let's look at real outcomes, hospitalizations and things like that. So what Bobby Kennedy is doing now is he is tilting the research agenda to have a more holistic, less drug obsessed approach. And so once we start to get some of this evidence, which hopefully will back up what my clinical experience has been that there are really great non-drug approaches for mental health, then we can get insurance companies to start reimbursing this because we'll have this really high quality evidence. And this really needs to happen from the government. This isn't going to happen from a pharmaceutical industry. And so I think that top-down approach and also the bottom-up, but none of us should be waiting for that to happen. That's going to be a really, really long time.
Well, and you bring up such a great point that so much of it is based on reimbursement models. And so the clinical decision making ends up being a code. And you as a human being, you as a patient, you are not a code, you are a human being. And to your point, biological systems are complex. And so we're in this strange medical approach to targeting one biological target. But by targeting one, you're affecting many. And we forget that biological systems are complex. And so if you shift one, you're going to shift another. And doing the basic things of, and I love that you keep bringing up the point of exercise and movement and diet. A metabolically unwell society can't expect to have all of their systems hitting on all cylinders, basically. I want another question on that is sleep and mental health. Can you hit on the topic of sleep and mental health and how that affects so many conditions as well?
Yeah, so sleep is near and dear to my heart. So at the Taper Clinic, the patients that we see the most are those who are on sedatives, Klonopin, Xanax, Ambien, and so insomnia is a really common problem. I bet that at least half of the people listening in on this call right now have insomnia. They're not getting enough sleep. They're not getting the amount of sleep that they want. They're having nighttime awakenings and all of that. And again, this is just another one of those areas where we just botch it. People come in and they say, well, I've been having, sleep problems. It's been several months. It's impacting my life. And it's quite easy to get put on a sedative medication. Again, this is a drug that has no evidence of long-term helpfulness. There's actually a lot of evidence that it makes people more anxious and more agoraphobic and even causes memory problems long-term. And then also they're some of the hardest drugs to stop. I mean, getting off Klonopin or Xanax after several years, sometimes even decades, I mean, it's hell. I'm tapering people sometimes for 1 to 2 years to ease them off in a way that doesn't upend their life. Insomnia. Sorry, Dr. Cole, go on.
No, keep going. No, it was great. I thought of another question, but keep going. You're on a roll.
Yeah. No, well, I was going to say the issue with insomnia is that it's a very complicated issue. I mean, it's essentially a problem with hyperarousal. You're not able to get into a relaxed state. And when we think about the reasons why people don't get into a relaxed state, I mean, we have like mental things. This is people who, patients who get very, worked up about things that aren't in their control. And so a lot of that cognitive behavioral type interventions it's a lot of stoicism. It's teaching people to not believe every stupid thing that their mind tells them and to create that distance. And that's easier said than done. I mean, I'm always still trying to do that. But then the other part of it, which we do a terrible job of, is insomnia is not just a nighttime problem, it's a life problem. I mean, it is just your baseline level of arousal. And when you look at it, you go, okay, well, how can I improve my baseline level of arousal? How can I get into a more rested and relaxed state? Well, it's cutting down stimulants and certain medications. It's moving your body. We know exercise and weightlifting and all of that. It all increases your heart rate variability, which is this great marker for relaxation. It's diet. If you're eating ultra processed foods and things that are inflammatory, that's also going to increase your arousal. And so I love insomnia because it's one of these things that just seems like it's an impossible nut to crack, but you can break it down into all of the little things that cause hyperarousal. You can give your patients hope again, and you can work on them. And not only does their sleep improve over time, but also just their general health gets better because a lot of it's the same big cinder blocks. It's like stress management, diet, exercise, getting rid of like harmful drugs and alcohol and all of that.
Absolutely. And one of my hobby
Mhm.
horses that I kind of beat on, and just from personal experience, I've been one of those 4 to 5 hour sleepers since I hit puberty. So some of us are wired that way. Lately have been focusing more on circadian cycles personally, trying to meet the sunshine, sunrise, set the circadian clock, get adequate amounts of sunshine, which again, with all the screen time in our society, so many people aren't getting what nature has given them, and we're out of rhythm with what our bodies do. If you're exercising, like you bring up, try to do it outside if the weather permits. And I know it's winter, so it's harder. And another thing, and I don't know if you've looked at this. This is another area I've looked at because I've beat this drum for a long time now. Is vitamin D levels and depression or anxiety, and how that plays a role on our basic physiology when, especially in the wintertime, we're low in vitamin D if you don't take other measures. Have you looked at that? I've seen even some studies that show that having a normal vitamin D level is better head to head against any SSRI.
This is one of the areas I'm not overly familiar with this. I mean, my understanding is that low levels of vitamin D correlate very strongly with anxiety and depression. Um, and then the question is, well, why, right? Is because I also know that we've had studies where we've supplemented vitamin D in controlled experimental studies, and it hasn't led to separation between the two groups. And so it makes you kind of think. And so this is one of those areas where a lot of people still take it, but I wouldn't say that there's a consensus there. But potentially the vitamin D is correlated with being outside. And so what happens when you're outside? So you're exercising, you're unplugged from your screen, maybe you're more physically healthy. And so it may be more about like getting outside, moving your body, disconnecting from the screens, not staying inside the whole time. So I think it's a complex relationship. It's not one that I fully understand yet, but I think the punchline is, it's not taking a vitamin D supplement. I think you definitely should do it if you're low, but nothing beats the real deal. Get outside in the sun, and move your body outside.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point. I don't think it's necessary and sufficient. It's just a piece of the puzzle, and getting that natural light, the near infrared rays from the sunshine in the morning and at sunset that help with some of that circadian biology. So, okay, we've kind of identified systems problems, and I know we could talk for hours because you're such a well-rounded thinker and have had so much experience, trying to help people break away from the system. So in terms of hope, what should patients be asking their doctors if they go in and get this 15-minute, oh yeah, you check the box, here's something, try this. What should patients really be asking their doctors?
Yeah, this may sound kind of crazy, but I don't know if you should be asking
Hey,
asking at least
that's
you
why this is
yeah.
honest medicine. I love that answer.
Yeah. Because I mean, how much is someone like if you go to your PCP and you say, "Hey, I'm having problems with anxiety and depression." What do you get on average? Maybe like 7 to 8 minutes of FaceTime. They'd probably spend half the time talking about cardiovascular disease. Like how helpful is that going to be? I mean, what I would tell patients to do is firstly that your symptoms mean something. Be very, the last thing you should accept is that this is just a biological thing. I mean, you really want to turn over all the rocks and look at everything before you say, hey, maybe this is just the way I'm wired. And so look at these professionals as people that may help you uncover what these symptoms mean. So I think if it makes sense to you that you're like, yeah, there's definitely some things going on in my life, whether it's relationships or sense of meaning or purpose, you're going to be best served by finding a therapist that you mesh with, someone that can really dig into that and help you find clarity. If you're someone who just feels physically bad in their body, you're looking at your life and you're thinking, this is like things are okay. Why do I feel so hot? Why do I feel so restless? Why am I so uneasy? That's when you should go and see a functional medicine doctor or any doctor, at least who takes a much more holistic look at your health, because they're going to be the ones that are going to look at diet, exercise, sleep, side effects of medications you're using, substances. They can also look at medical conditions like thyroid problems and your gut health. And so I think functional medicine doctor for when it's not anchored to your life, and then a therapist for the things that make sense. And so there is that's what I would do. That's what I think makes the most sense.
That's such a great approach because we're in such a fast food society, 30-second TikTok hit of dopamine and just everybody wants this quick hit, but you bring up such a great approach to it that look, let's look at everything. Let's slow down. Let's look at the big picture and get to the root cause. And gosh, time has flown by. I see Autumn popping onto my screen, which means it's time for questions from the audience. Before we let Autumn ask the audience questions, just we're in a new year. Everybody generally sets new goals. What gives you hope going forward? You've brought up some hopeful things, which I find encouraging. What gives you hope for our profession going forward? What gives you hope for things that can be done in this new year?
I'm so hopeful going into this new year. Um, I think never before has there been more interest in things like diet and exercise, which just sounds so like, oh yeah, it's just diet and exercise. But with the new food pyramid, the fact that it's shifting. People aren't looking at this anymore like, hey, it's not that important. It can't be important because my doctor hasn't mentioned it, and so and I think they're starting to realize in the media and also patients that the reason we're not hearing about all of these non-drug approaches for our health is just because of time, and that doctors really aren't trained or reimbursed to do that. So I just think we have this lifting of the consciousness right now where people are there's so much more agency over health. I mean, I talk to so many moms and the awesome things that they're doing for their kids. And groups like IMA, what Bobby Kennedy is doing, what's happening in the podcast circuit with, I mean, there's so many people who are getting these messages out there. I think we've turned a corner. I think many people they're so much more engaged in their health and are questioning things. And so I just think we've hit an inflection point, and I think there's going to be great things happening in the health of this country.
I could agree. I could not agree more, and I love that. That is a definite positive direction, and grateful to be part of it with you as a member on our IMA team. Real quick, where can people find you? I know you're probably booked to the gills in terms of seeing patients and helping them taper
Yeah.
off. But I know you have a network and telehealth services with a lot of providers that work with you. Where can patients, find help when they're looking for it?
Sure. So www taper, like drug taper. It's taperclinic.com. And we work in the 15 most populous US states. And so we have a team that can help people come off medications and find non-drug approaches to their mental health. And then we're also on social media. We make a lot of free content. If you want to taper with your own doctor, guidances specifically how to come off benzodiazepines and antidepressants. And so all of that can be best found at my YouTube channel, which is Dr. Josef, but it's spelt Josef in the German way. And that's a great place for just, yeah, resources to taper with your doctor.
Well, I can't thank you enough for this conversation. And again, we just scratched the surface, but you bring hope to me in the sense of knowing that there are colleagues out there that care about your health and that are doing things to help you on your health journey. So let's bring in Autumn because I know she's going to have some great questions from the audience. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Autumn, and fire away.
Yes, hello to you both and to everybody listening and watching. I'm just going to jump right into these questions. First one from Bob Isaacson. He asked, what is the latest research on school shootings and or school-related acts of violence that have been committed by those taking or withdrawing off of psychiatric drugs? Are either of you familiar with any research around this area?
So yeah, the current research is incredibly biased. I mean, I've seen studies where certain academics have FOIA'd, Freedom of Information Acted, the FBI to try and get essentially reports on this, and everything is just like redacted. And so there's nothing there. Unfortunately, the conclusion is, well, there's no evidence it's related, but everything was redacted. So and I've also seen epidemiology studies where they bundle up gang shootings with other acts of violence, and drug-induced homicide is not like a gang shooting. I mean, these things happen at school, these things happen at workplaces, these things happen within families. And so there's been minimal effort to kind of distinguish the unique nature of drug-induced homicide. But there is some hope because I know Secretary Kennedy I mean, he talked publicly about this recently, and my understanding is that this is a focus of his, and with an issue like this, you're never going to figure it out like with a database study. You need to do in-person interviews. Drug-induced homicide is incredibly rare. The vast majority of people on psychiatric medications are not dangerous. I mean, these are potentially 1 in 1 million, 1 in 2 million rare adverse reactions. And the only way you can really tease it out is by, when something like this happens, is getting boots on the ground to interview the patient. And if the patient's still alive, and the family members and the doctors, so you can look at, the main things are a close temporal relationship. Did they just get on the drug or raise the dose? And then you also want to look like for uncharacteristic behavior. Were they acting in a way that was very different? And is that backed up by multiple sources? Does the spouse and the doctor say, yeah, he was really talking off his head. He was pacing around the place. He looked really off. So the way that we're going to crack this issue is by doing really good clinical interviews. And my understanding is that's on the way right now. And the hope is that if we find enough of these cases, it will influence policy. And some things could be like, hey, if you put someone on psychiatric medication, they need to be told about this. But also you may need to talk to a loved one to say, hey, if you notice any strange changes in behavior, call the hospital immediately. Because this really isn't an issue about getting rid of the drugs completely. It's about public safety and making sure that people are monitored. And if things are going off in the wrong direction, we can act quickly. So more to come. I think we're going to get good information there soon.
Sarah asked, she's curious to know if you have done any research into the use of niacin, as it was very beneficial for her and pulled her out of her depression very quickly.
Yeah, niacin is I think that's B3. And so it's a lot of these different vitamins like niacin, B12, folate. They're really involved in the metabolism and the creation of different neurotransmitters. And so if you have one of those deficiencies, you will manifest as anxiety and depression. Um, it's one of those things where it's that is picked up on a lab test. I often get worried about people when they talk about, different vitamins. Hey, whether it's vitamin D or niacin or take this or that, because I don't want us. And I know it worked for you, but for many people, sometimes I feel like that can be a distraction because we always have, I think, this fundamental layer where it's like we're going to work on our diet first, then we're going to do exercise, we're going to look at medical conditions, and then we're going to look at the zebras. Then we're going to go and dive into like the micronutrient problems. There is a sequence which I think is important to follow because all of a sudden you're completely overwhelmed and I'm going to take this supplement or this one or I'm going to do this, I'm going to do sauna or I'm going to do cold plunge and while you might be missing like foundational things that are really important in your mental health, but yes, yeah, niacin has been incredibly useful for people, specifically those with that deficiency.
She had mentioned that it was also something that seemed to be censored on Google, and she was having to use other search engines to find information about it. So I wanted to make sure she got your thoughts on that. Um, I know that the Taper Clinic offers a lot of free information and resources, but Pam Hicks asked, how can you get help with micro tapering if you can't afford the Taper Clinic or live in a state that they do not serve? She has an elderly mother on, I'm going to mispronounce this, temazepam for the last 20 years and has been having sleep issues. And yeah, so she's just looking for any advice on how to get assistance.
Great. Yes. So this is what I would do in your situation. I would so underneath all of the YouTube videos on my website. So there's two approaches. So the first one is you have to guide your doctor with this. And so we do a very comprehensive free drug tapering course. I think it takes probably about 5 hours to go through. It's listed under every single one of my YouTube videos. And if you invest the time to go through, you will have a great education on this, and you may actually feel confident working with your doctor to build out a taper. So with something like temazepam, essentially what you're going to do is you're going to get the temazepam. I would recommend you transition it to a liquid, and so you do if your mom's on 15, you do a 15 milligram to 1 ml concentration, and and then essentially you get this like 1 ml syringe, and it has 100 little dashes on the side of it, and it allows you to with great precision gradually lower it over time. So you might knock off 5 spaces, wait 2 weeks. Hey, mom did okay. Now I'm going to knock off 7. And you kind of just titrate it based on how she's doing. And over the course of maybe 6 months to a year, you can kind of just ease it down like that. And so that's one approach. You do the course, and if you feel comfortable, you guide your doctor. The second thing that you can do is on our website, if you go to the Contact Us section right at the bottom, we list a lot of directories. And so there's like Surviving Antidepressants, Mad in America, there's the Benzo Information Coalition. I would go to the Benzo Information Coalition directory, and that has all of the doctors in different states in the US and even internationally who are into drug tapering. And so let's say you're in Montana or Wyoming or something like that. You go to that directory and you can find someone there, and they may be able to help as well.
Last question before I move over to our closing announcement, since we're at the top of the hour. We had a lot of people asking if you were familiar with various different doctors, but a lot of emphasis on Dr. Daniel Amen. If you're familiar with his work and what your thoughts are.
I am familiar with Dr. Daniel Amen. He's it's I smile because like he's the other YouTube psychiatrist, he's the like,
Mhm.
and so we're, you know, we're on social media together. I would say we're very different. Dr. Amen, to his credit, is uh, places quite a lot of emphasis on lifestyle modification and things like that. But the ways we differ is that I think he's pretty hot on psychiatric medications. I know he uses brain scans to look at areas in the brain that are lower in perfusion, and he says he's able to look at that and say, hey, maybe the frontal lobes are kind of a bit lower, and if we can use like a stimulant, we can lift that back up and we can get you more functional.
Mhm.
I think some people that helps, but to me, ultimately, I worry about that because, again, I think most psychiatric medications, they really should be avoided long term, and I worry they can make people worse long term because our brains really aren't designed to be in a drug state indefinitely. And
Mhm.
so I would say he's probably more conventional than I am in his use of medications.
Well, thank you so much for answering all of those questions. I know we could keep going down the list of questions, but Dr. Cole or Dr. Witt-Doerring, do you guys have any closing thoughts before I move over to our closing announcements? Anything you'd like to leave our audience with?
I'd like to say, again, a big thank you to Dr. Josef for joining us this evening and for his uh, standing up against a system that's broken and doing practical things to help people on a practical level. And I'm just grateful to be on the team with him and with everybody behind the scenes here. We are at a hopeful inflection in medicine, and he's part of the hope. So thank you for joining us tonight, Dr. Witt-Doerring. Just fantastic information, and so much good can be done just by lifestyle change and just by some of these basics that he brings up. So, you know, be your own best doctor and do a lot of these things that he talks about. You have the opportunity to reclaim your health, and now's the time to do it. So thank you.
Yeah. And I'll just say thank you so much for having me, and just to the IMA team for sort of embracing what I'm doing and kind of bringing mental health in with all of the vaccine stuff, and it's just been an awesome community to be a part of.
All right. Well, thank you both so much. I will switch over to our closing announcements. All right. Well, we hope that you enjoyed tonight's show. And to start off, I wanted to talk a little bit about next week's show. We have IMA co-founder and chief medical officer, Dr. Josef Verone, and IMA Senior Fellow, Dr. Adil Verone, as they explore sleep healing from a Western medical standpoint and an Eastern medicine perspective. That is going to be on Wednesday, January 28th at 7 p.m. We have a new guide that has come out, a clear integrated guide to men's movement, muscle, and metabolism, showing how strength training, hormones, and metabolic health work together to support energy, resilience, and longevity. This guide was created by IMA Senior Fellow, Dr. Christina Carmen. The framework cuts through the noise, focuses on habits, labs, daily rhythms that drive real results. You can download this guide by visiting imahealth.org or by searching the short link on screen, which is geni.us/men's blueprint. We hope that you will join us again this year for the 2026 IMA Medical Education Conference, Emerging Trends in Medicine, a two-day gathering dedicated to the latest innovations, research, and forward-thinking practices shaping the future of healthcare. This event offers a dynamic program of expert-led lectures, networking opportunities, and hands-on learning through Abstract Alley and much more. You can get your tickets at the link on screen, and that is imahealth.org/conference. As we have mentioned before, IMA is building a national trusted referral network, connecting patients with independent clinicians vetted for ethical patient-first care. Your support helps fund this platform development, helps us with provider onboarding and public access so patients can finally answer the question that we hear every day: where can I find a doctor that I trust? You can support this work by donating at imahealth.org/restoring trust or just imahealth.org/donate. Before we wrap up, I want to thank you again to Dr. Witt-Doerring and Dr. Cole for today's important conversation. And thank you again to everyone watching live or on the replay. If this episode was helpful, please consider sharing it so these conversations can reach more people. Before we go, we wanted to share a brief clip of IMA Senior Fellow, Dr. Kat Lindley, on CHD TV this week, where she discusses IMA's role as a founding member of the Medical Freedom Act Coalition, committed to protecting informed consent, parental rights, and the doctor-patient relationship. Let's take a look.
Dr. Kat Lindley, you are with IMA, the Independent Medical Alliance. Why don't you talk to us about your perspective, your organization's perspective on this concept of no medical mandates? There are a lot of doctors out there gripping their pearls, even thinking about hearing such a thing, especially here in the United States. But why don't you give us your perspective from a medical perspective on your support for this legislation?
So IMA has about 12,000 physicians and other healthcare professionals, and we are proud to be part of this coalition because, when mandates happened early on, I struggled as someone who actually is a legal immigrant who came from a communist country. This whole idea that the country free as the United States will have a mandate for people to get something they don't want. And then seeing Idaho pass this bill really meant a lot because patients should have a choice. And during this pandemic, patients actually have been robbed of informed consent. No one has given them informed consent of what they're doing. They just said, you have to do it. You have to do it to have a job. You have to do it to go to school. And this idea that we all have to do something, it's not how we do it in medicine. Medicine is very individualized. You need to look at the patient. Some patients cannot get certain products, but many states actually said that there were no exemptions. You have to do it. Kids, young adults couldn't go to college unless they did something. So IMA is standing with the rest of our coalition partners to kind of give a hand from the scientific standpoint and also from a patient advocacy perspective. We have a patient bill of rights because we feel that every patient should be able to go to their doctor's office. And, as a doctor, I'm supposed to give you advice. I'm not supposed to tell you you have to do this no matter what. You should hopefully take my advice because it comes from, scientific background, from knowledge of what you need. But the idea that you have to do something just because the states tell you someone, the government tells us we have to do something, or for us to have to introduce a foreign substance into patients just because you have to, right? I don't think it's the way that we practice medicine, and it's not something that patients should even have to worry about. As I said, this idea of informed consent has been lost. And to restore trust in medicine, you have to have doctors and other healthcare professionals who have these candid conversations with our patients. So, we're standing behind this because every state should pass this bill to make sure that we protect the patient.
That is just fantastic. And a really powerful statement. You brought up that you came as an immigrant legally to this country. You had come from a communist nation. Recently, it was sent to me, and please, Leslie or Dr. Lindley, correct me if I'm wrong, but that both Russia and China have more freedom when it comes to choice in vaccine than the United States of America does. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And you know what? We're all our own ex, right? So I posted something regarding this idea of medical freedom and patients having choice, regarding the childhood vaccine. And then one pediatrician said, I believe it was Dr. Hotes that says, no one is making anyone do anything. We don't give mandates in our offices. And my reply was, well, if you are telling patients they cannot be seen anymore because they don't want to get vaccines, that means that, yes, you are giving them ultimatums. So yeah, the countries like, Russia and China, who are communist country where you would expect them to actually tell their people, you have to do this, don't do it, but we do. And it's really a hard concept for me, and again, I'm going to go back to that, someone who came from communism comes to this country that's free, where you have a choice, where we just said, no, you have no choice, you have to do it. And in California, they're still doing it, right? They don't even take exemptions. So it's just a crazy world.